I think I'm looking at the clock and I've seen the aggressively timed agenda for this evening. So we'll go ahead maybe and start with a roll call. Make sure it looks like we have a quorum, but formally doing that. Sue, will you help us with that?
Yes. Solomon Allen.
Present.
Greg Minahan. Timothy Carpenter.
Present.
Beth Koshman.
Present.
Molly Olson.
Here.
Lizelle Mathai. Brad Sitton.
Here.
Rick Rogers.
Present.
Denise Bacon.
Here.
Bryce Cofield.
Here.
Stephanie Finley.
On mute.
Here.
Julia Martinez Plancarte.
Present.
Elise Yarnell Holloman.
Here.
Mike McBride.
Here.
So you have 12 present, 2 absent at this time.
And I think, Rob, if you help me remember, we always have to have over half of each side of the committee. Is that correct? Or is that just when we're adopting a resolution?
I think that's just if you're adopting, and to be honest,
Okay.
I'd have to go back and look to see if that is a requirement or not. I'll have an answer for you at the next meeting. How's that?
That's fine. We don't have a problem tonight, but it was a trick quiz question at the finance training. Anyway, all right. So tonight what we're going to do is we're going to start plowing through the budget. Everyone received it, is that correct? I made great reading late at night. Greg, I think Greg has just joined us. Couple of things. We set a pretty rigid time scale. I don't want that to mean that people don't ask the questions they need. I think that's to encourage our presenters to stay on track. So as we go down it, I'll call out the budget page that you can find the section on, and then ask the presenters to try and keep to their time limits. And then if we need more time, we'll take it to make sure everyone's questions and comments get out there. Does that sound okay? The other thing is, I know the hand raise thing can work, and Sue will be watching it, and I'm sure Dan will and I will, but if your hand is up and you're not getting called on, just start talking and interrupt us so that we know that you need to speak. Okay, and with that, turn it over to Dan to start the general message. And that can be found on page 9 of the book.
Before we do that, I think we have some business in terms of the minutes from last year.
Gosh, that's right.
So I think those were included in the packet that was sent out. If there's motions on that, I think we would do that, and then I will roll.
Walk through the message. Okay, here's the other quiz question. I can ask for someone to make a motion to approve the previous year's minutes.
Yes.
Someone has to do it with a name so that Sue knows who it was. Oh, come on, you guys, somebody. Don't be shy.
You just got to hit that unmute.
Oh,
So moved.
And do we have a second?
Second.
Awesome. Okay. And with that stringent requirement out of the way, it's over to you, Dan.
Okay.
Wait. I forgot the whole thing. All those in favor, raise your hand on the screen. If you have any nays, take yourself off mute if you need to say no. Okay, passed. There. I've passed my first one. Now we can go.
Okay, so I'll try and do this in my allotted time and move relatively quickly. I'm trying to put a PowerPoint together just to focus, the discussion, I guess. It's a relatively long budget message with a lot of things called out, but just wanted to, if you can do the next slide, Sue, just talk through quickly some of the stage setting of the year that's been, the year that will be, we hope. just review back on my own end in this last day or so, just looking at last year's packet and last year's budget and really thinking about COVID being a few months, and we're still dealing with it as we go back into high risk in Yamhill County, unfortunately. So we fully anticipate that priorities for the year will include COVID recovery, and all that will entail. I believe, as we mentioned in the orientation meeting, that we're not budgeting for our American Rescue Plan funds, but we are anticipating receiving those, and we will reconvene to work through what that would look like in terms of funding the recovery with those dollars. But just know that internally, the staff are working on COVID recovery measures and constantly adjusting open, closed, service level, et cetera, as we do deal with the COVID restrictions that are imposed on us by the state. Obviously working on goals, customer service, DEI, affordable housing, urban renewal, and sustainability on the council side. And then on the community vision, the pillars for that plan adopted in 2019, community engagement, community leadership, cultural assets, economic development, livability and development, all important, and in some ways, in my mind, at least, starting to weave together and become a bit more of a thread. So we're trying to fund those activities as we move forward year over year and make progress. Working on achievable, that's important. We don't want to fund things and then give the money back per se to the general fund or to whatever fund. We want to accomplish what we set out to do and be reasonable about what we're trying to accomplish as well. And then lastly, just as has been highlighted in the previous session, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail, I'm sure as we go forward through this, the restructuring of internal operations and just generally trying to review what we do in the city to continue to improve. Next slide, please. So we mentioned this before as well, so I'll go light on this slide. That your packet looks different for those of you who've looked at one of these before. And hopefully it's getting clearer. One of my aspirational goals is that we can receive the outstanding budget presentation from Government Finance Officers Association, GFOA. Really to receive that, it's not just an award, it's really about making your budget really readable, understandable, and clear for both the community and staff. And so, to me, trying to eliminate things that are extraneous, trying to work within the time and the resources we have, but also to make it as clear as possible so that folks actually look at the budget and really can understand it and dive in and hold us accountable for the things that we put in there. Next slide, please. So we're back to COVID. And, not to belabor the point, but just really for us, it's been, that's been the theme of the year, unfortunately. And I know that's sort of the understatement of the year for 2020, but as we look forward, I think we're experiencing some of the drag or the headwinds that COVID has brought. But I think hopefully as things like vaccines become more available, we'll see things reopen. But knowing how much of a driver the transient lodging tax is, heads on pillows in hotel rooms and things like that are important for the budget. Not just for tourism and the regional economy, but also for the cities. So trying to get back to some of that is extremely important for us. But also just imagining the lag, some of the joblessness issues that folks have had. We're also seeing challenges in hiring and getting people off the sidelines and back into work because the federal benefits are so rich. And so, just presents a number of challenges, both immediate and I think for next year as well, as we sort of set the stage and think ahead as to fund balances and how we're going to leave this year's budget a year from now. Next slide, please. So it's in there, the structural deficit conversation. I believe it's somewhat of an annual rite of passage for city managers in Newberg. We'll talk more about my perception of it, and Rob and I have talked about this a number of times. So I think the two of us will maybe walk you through some of it. But the reality is, you do see that we are, in the general fund, we are living beyond our means, and we're doing so in a way that is, I think, unsustainable because a lot of the issues we have are personnel, staff driven, and our costs continue to go up year over year as we provide cost of living adjustments or have other changes to the financial packages that we offer staff. The other issue is, of course, trying to make sure that we're programmatically aligned with the efforts and the things that the community wants. And so, in providing a few options that are in the message as well as on the screen, thinking about ways we might augment our revenue such that it comports with the way that the residents of Newberg have told us in the past that they would be willing to spend money. So looking at the public safety fee, we have and we'll get into the detail of it later, but we have a public safety fee for officers and we have a communication officer fee. The communication officer fee was secondary, but had a cost escalator to it. The public safety fee was adopted without an escalator. And so in 2009, it was funding 3 officers, and now it's funding 2. And, that is a significant cost to the general fund that is not being offset and is an option in terms of how we might move forward, adjusting that fee to try to capture that 3rd officer again and the costs related to that individual. Obviously we can reduce our funding for staff and some of the funded departments in the general fund. I would think that, reducing staffing reasonably, will come with a reduction in service. And so the question, of course, being what service levels do we expect and want as a community, and how do we go forward with, sort of matching expectations to the financial realities of the city organization. So that option may be palatable in terms of the short term, reducing the staffing levels, and it may be palatable from a long-term standpoint if we decide that those staffing levels are the service levels related to the staffing reductions would be appropriate. But that's an ongoing and maybe more robust conversation than we might get into in the budget committee. Just an option to put out there. And then, thinking about other fees and other ways to capture revenue from some of the services we offer, ways to also think about, the services that we have in the departments, and again, just adjusting service levels. So, trying to think holistically here about some options, but also presenting the fact that we're nearly, in this, at least when we put this together initially, and that may change. And that has been the story of the structural deficit in Newberg. But if you look at the number that we had, it was $815,000, which is, to me, rather significant. And, the way that we've often come out of this has been through vacancies or one-time sale of property or those kinds of issues. And to me, living that close to the margin on a structural deficit is really not a healthy budget, thinking long-term. Next slide, please. So mentioned the reorganization before in our orientation, and now you've, I think, had a little bit of time to see the plan, and we'll talk in more detail about it. But just wanted to talk about it in concept as to why. I think for me, it's really trying to think about the resources we have, and again, kind of in some ways going back to this concept of service levels and staffing appropriately. Trying to minimally impact the full-time equivalency count that we have in terms of staff. So not trying to add many staff in this budget or just in general. So one of the best ways we can do that is to restructure and to move staff roles around. And so that's one opportunity here, but really trying to also think about what our internal needs are. And, I like to talk about the fishbowl's fishbowl. We work in a fishbowl in local government. We're public, transparent, and provide a service to the community. Those that provide the service to us as external staff are the internal service departments, the finance, IT, and HR folks. and coordinating the effort there will help us be more efficient, help us be more responsive to those folks. You know, the fishbowl's fishbowl, you've got to be almost ahead of really when it's being asked, because, you know, the folks in the community will expect a prompt response. You've got to be providing that response or that resource to an external department before they really need it in many ways. And right now, we're a little clunky. You know, there is a fair amount of what some have described as debris in the forest. Maybe some things that we can clean up and you know, get some better pathways to provide the service. Being more efficient in terms of how we use technology in our systems. That then unlocking some of the ability for folks to work remotely and or to just be more effective in self-service and providing us with tools that that staff can be more responsive, you know, to each other and externally. You know, it's really an effort that I think will benefit by a partnership model, folks understanding each other's business needs and really then advocating for and planning for those needs as they evolve. And so thinking about a partnership model where someone is an expert in something and all the systems related to that, they can then really understand where that service might be going. And, you know, that's one of the needs we have, is to be proactive and to plan ahead so that we don't get to these cliffs and sort of need a catastrophic or very expensive fix to a service or to some of the systems that we use. So, you know, again, we'll talk in more detail, but I just wanted to talk about that a little bit in this budget message. And my last slide, if you'll advance that one, Sue, is really just kind of a summary of some of the notable program and or staff changes noted in the message and arguably in the budget itself. You know, there's an effort to add 2 staff members, one community engagement specialist. Hopefully, we're looking for a bilingual individual who can help us with outreach to a Latinx population, as well as just augmenting and supplementing the work that Lacey Digraph does for us and really provide more engagement to the community. We're looking to add a human resources manager, and that being an effort to free Kezia to be more effective in her role as the assistant city manager, and now sort of the person bringing together these 3 divisions. The goal there is, rather than spending her time on you know, some of the tasks, the day-to-day tasks of human resources, to provide some strategy and to have a higher level management of those 3 divisions. You know, really try to utilize the economic health manager position to lead our COVID response, and, you know, a lot of engagement opportunities there, and also connectivity between some of the federal and state programs that are being offered in 2021 response, you know, so the ARP and some of the discretionary programs that we might apply for as a community or with community partners or regional partners, and seek additional funds to speed up the COVID recovery. We are interested in the Newberg Dundee Police Department in body-worn cameras. We made a strategic decision that I think is actually unfortunately not reflected in this version of the budget, but is intentionally that we will seek a grant and not fund them in the budget, and you know, hope that we are able to receive that grant. Part of the effort that I've spoken to Interim Chief Kosmicki about is we need to put the policies in place, and I think he's done a lot of that work already. We need to think about what the community engagement is on it, so that folks can see the cameras, understand the cameras, and buy into the idea of how they're going to be used. And then, you know, I think, you know, hopefully we'll have a successful rollout of those into the community. And I believe that that is something that the police department is very interested in. You know, the rank and file officers, as well as the administration, are interested in acquiring the body-worn cameras. So I'm hopeful that we'll have a strong grant application. And we did reflect in the budget sort of the ongoing expectation that there is ongoing cost associated with acquiring that, because there are IT needs in addition to the actual hardware of the cameras themselves. So trying to get over the finish line with urban renewal is a major, it's a council goal, it's a major economic development goal. And so we're near the finish line and had first meeting last night with the city council, or I should say the Urban Renewal Authority board. And, it's exciting to kind of be at that point, but obviously there's still some work to be done there. And so, we want to make sure that we finish successfully on that project. Continuing to transition the city attorney work and the role there. Some of the added cost in the first year is expected as we ramp up and we spend a fair amount of time on knowledge transfer and essentially cleaning up some of the projects that had lingered in the interim period between in-house at council and the folks with Miller Nash. Working on evaluating options of our financial software, again, back to sort of the reorg, but also to the efficiency opportunities that we have, trying to think ahead on, the features that we're going to need and want, and how to provide some of that work with payroll or, just the ongoing budget development or other opportunities with software. And then, last couple items on this slide, really focusing on an inventory of our assets and then a plan for management. Again, trying not to fall off the cliff on some of those things and reduce and or manage some of the costs that we have for carrying those things that are going to be end of life at a certain point. And so planning ahead on that. And then finally, capital improvement projects. I say many because we're going from about 8 or 9 million to 20 some odd million. And I think it's aggressive, but I think we're able to fund it, and I think well along on some of those projects, and we'll talk about in detail all of those items later on. So with that, I want to thank you all for your service on the committee and to the community by serving on this committee. And frankly, hats off. It's one of those things that, while I may like this as a process and be into the budgeting, municipal budgeting is tough. And I appreciate in advance your questions and your participation. So thank you. And thanks to staff for putting things together.
Okay. Are there high-level questions for the city manager? Because we'll get into the details next, but anyone have any clarifying questions? Raring to go. All right, Rob, next to you.
Great. Thank you, Molly. So I'm just going to spend just a couple of minutes sort of introducing you to the general fund revenues. There's not significant changes versus where we expect to end 2021. I always think that it's maybe more relevant to compare what's budgeted to where we actually think we're going to end up this year, because the budget for this year was put together 18 months ago based on incomplete information. So they're both important benchmarks, but relative to the end where we expect to end 2021, our 21-22 estimate for general fund revenues is relatively flat. It's a couple $100,000 up. We have been conservative, but I don't believe overly so in our estimates. Property taxes, we have allowed for the 3% statutory growth in assessed value and the translation of that into property tax revenues. The big unknown there, as we discussed when we talked about trends last time we met, is we simply don't know what the impact COVID is going to have yet on people's ability to pay their property taxes and how that's going to ripple through the state to the local governments. Everybody, all the clients that I work with are in a sort of a wait and see mode on that. And everybody is kind of taking a, well, let's kind of see where we end up. And if we have to adjust later, we will. So that's what we've done here. Transit lodging tax, again, very much the same approach. These are a couple of the larger numbers on the general fund revenue. Actually, transient lodging tax isn't in the general fund, but when we get there, it's a similar thing. We've been fairly conservative, kind of gauging off of where we were in 2021. We would hope to see some improvement in 21-22, but it's a little early to tell there. Franchise fees is another big kind of clump of revenue for the general fund. We've anticipated some growth there as the revenues that are charged by the franchisees. I can never remember franchisors versus franchisees, but Pacific, Northwest Natural and PGE, et cetera, as their fees go up, as they raise their rates, the revenue increases, and our franchise fee is based on a percentage of their revenue. Some of those we are seeing decreases in as people shift more to cell phone use and away from landline use. For example, we see drops in some of the telephone, some of the cable, for example, just depending on what is going on in the economy and in the demographics that are Newberg. One area where we are seeing an increase is in the franchise fees paid by our internal funds to the general fund, because we do have some rate increases anticipated in water, sewer, and stormwater, and we'll get to those later. But those naturally, again, are based on a percentage and result in some additional income into the general fund. Kind of the big kind of one-time thing you'll see at the bottom there of page 31 is a transfer into the general fund from the vehicle equipment replacement fund. We're eliminating that fund, Fund 32. And so this was the portion of kind of the general fund's portion of that bank account, if you will, that was sitting over there. Now we're moving it back over to the general fund, and it has been set aside as part of contingency for those future expenditures. And I guess let me just talk just briefly about that, because that hits a number of funds that we're going to see tonight. But what in effect, what we were doing is from a number of these funds, we were transferring monies into Fund 32 and sort of banking them there for future expenditure. Well, that works in some occasions, but it was established as a capital projects fund, and we were using it for things other than just capital projects or capital acquisition. We were using it to bank training costs and some, IT types of costs, et cetera. And we really weren't using the fund technically correct. And it seems to be a bit more transparent if we simply do those things in the funds where they're initiated. So that's one of the sort of structural changes we made in the budget this year. But hopefully, just circling back, general fund revenues, there's not a tremendous amount to talk about there, because they are relatively flat versus fiscal 2021. I would be happy to take questions from the committee. You guys are great tonight. You guys are on point.
Or asleep. I don't know. How do you tell the difference? Oh, sorry, video. No, seriously, Rob, when we get to TLT, can you tell us what the potential, well, not tonight, but when we get to it, the potential upside in revenue? We've been conservative, which is good. You don't want to spend money you don't have. It would be nice to understand what the range is there, what people are thinking. So not a request to change it, just to understand what our possible upside would be. Great. And you finished right on time, so extra kudos. Okay, on to general government. Back to you, Dan.
Yes, so general government is the mayor and city council. I think I can probably do this pretty quickly. Not much in the way of change in the last year. We obviously have a new councilor, some transition there in District 5, but I think in terms of expectations going forward, not really projecting significant change. We did have, or there is one item in, in essence, trying to maintain the dues and things like that. But there is one item in here about, or for professional services that had been 10,125. We didn't use that money this last year. It's intended for retreats, development, et cetera, and hopefully we will use that. So we kept that 10,000 or put it back in, I should say. And so just want to highlight that since there was no projected spend on that, but the intent is still there to get the council together and use some of those funds. The one thing that I did note that will probably change is we did project that's my $20,000 amount in the transit services, but I expect it'll stay at 18,000. There's not been a request for more, and honestly, I'm not sure in COVID that we received all of the services we paid for. I mean, based on things kind of being shut down in Newberg. So I suspect we will keep 18,000 in the budget and move that number down $2,000. And if there are questions, I'd be happy to take any.
Okay, on to the Muni Court, Kezia.
Good
I said that
evening, everyone. Yes, you did. Kezia
Okay.
Warner, Assistant City Manager, and I'll be covering briefly the municipal court. Our municipal court is in the general fund. It has 2.5 FTE that consists of a judge, the court administrator, and a half-time court clerk. The fiscal year 21-22 proposed budget for municipal court is $320,000, which is a decrease of nearly 4% from the current year adopted budget. Changes include the decrease in court costs, which is due to less supplies and equipment needed for the courtroom in next fiscal year. So for programming, pardon me, my phone is going and I need to just silence that. That's bad form. All right. For programming, the court staff helps defendants with resolution and code violations, traffic, and criminal charges. The municipal court has jurisdiction on these cases that are within the city limits. Some of the changes that are occurring and that will continue to evolve and expand in next fiscal year is that we are convening a community court. The first one will be held on May 25th. This takes place once a month after regular court sessions. The program will allow for non-criminal resolution to criminal problems. There's a handful of community partners who are partnering with us on the program, and some of the matters deal with mental health treatment, drug and alcohol treatment, getting help with IDs and the like. Community court will be held once a month after normal court proceedings. And just a little context in terms of workload, the citations for the calendar year 2020 were roughly half of that of calendar year 2019, which I think we could say is our last kind of normal year. So in 2020, we had a little over 1,000 citations. 2019, we had more than 2,100 citations. So far for 2021, we're on track with this last fiscal year or last calendar year. So we're still at that COVID rate of activity. And with that, I'm going to wrap up unless anyone has any questions.
All right, thank you. Jeff, on to, oh, sorry, Mike, did you have a question? You have to unmute.
Yes, I just wanted to ask on that community court. I don't know if I'm not looking at this right. What is the cost for that going to be?
The community court, I'm not sure that we're bearing additional cost for community court.
Okay, it's just part of the services
It's
overall.
just it's an expansion of services and programs.
Okay, all right.
Anyone else?
Sorry, quick question. Oh, sorry, Greg, you had your hand. You did it the right way. You should go.
Actually, I had a question going back for Rob on the general fund. If you would,
Yes, sir.
there is a line here on planning and subdivision fees that just seems to be a pretty significant variance off downward revision there on the revenue there. I was just wondering what went into that number. It's just seems relatively significant.
Let me just get back to that page. Sorry. Those estimates are put together by Doug Rux, our community development guru, but those are based on kind of what we expect the activity to be. And my understanding is that these things happen in cycles. So for example, we saw an increase in 2021 in the planning fees related to this. And then next year, we're seeing an increase in the actual payment of SDCs as they pay for their permits. So it's kind of rolling through the process, but I see Doug has joined us, so he can correct me as appropriate. You got to unmute, Doug.
I won't correct, Rob, but I will clarify.
Perfect.
So what we had happen this year is we had a number of commercial projects that we were anticipating that would happen in 21, 22. The developers advanced those and those came earlier. So we originally had budgeted $100,000 of revenue for that. But Friendsview came forward with 2 new projects that we weren't anticipating, and those were relatively expensive projects. So that's why our revenue is up for this fiscal year. Next fiscal year, in my conversations with the development community, we're not anticipating much of anything on the commercial development side. And we're not having conversations right now with anybody about doing new subdivisions. We are in that land constraint situation. So I don't have anybody coming to me saying, I'm going to do a 50 or 60 lot subdivision. What I've got is a few people telling me they're going to do a few partitions. So that's why we're going down from the projected for 2021 to what's proposed for 21, 22.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, Bryce.
This is probably getting too much in the weeds, which Rob told us explicitly not to do. So I acknowledge that. In the municipal, it looks like salaries and whatnot are remaining more or less the same, but there seems to be almost a little over 63. Oh, this is Kyrie. Yeah. Hi. Seems to be about a $6,000 decrease in health and life insurance or whatnot. I'm just curious how that can be.
Those estimates are based on the best information. See ya. Those are based on the best information that we have at the time about people's elections for what coverage they anticipate. That's, I guess beyond that, I don't have much of a better answer for you, Bryce, but that's how we come up with that as we go back and look at each individual. These are done on a position by position basis. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I just want to make sure folks aren't going to come back and be like, wait, you cut my what? By how much? And we end up, in a hard spot, but.
That's your first warning for being in the weeds, buddy.
Great. We got 100 pages to go.
Yeah, and with that, I'll say thank you, Bryce. You keep your weed whacker where you need it to be. Yeah. All right. Anyone else with tricky questions for the presenters? I appreciate the questions. Okay, then we'll go on to Jeff Kosmicki, who can tell us about the police.
Hi, good evening, and thank you guys for taking your time to be here. Our authorized strength, as you guys know, is 35. We budgeted last year for 33 police officers. We're sticking with 33. That consists of the chief, the captain, 5 sergeants, 2 corporals, 3 detectives, and 21 patrol officers. Within the 21 patrol officers, we have 2 traffic, 2 tracking canines, 1 school resource officer, and 14 other patrol officers that everyone in the 21 takes calls, but the other folks have some special assignments to go along with that. Within the department, we have teams. Most of you guys have already heard this, but we have a mental health response team. We have about 11 or 12 officers that are part of that. They work very closely with crisis intervention through the county. We do a lot of home visits with people who are in crisis or possibly in crisis or in need of mental health services. The home visits are basically to visit people when they're not in crisis, so that we can actually develop a rapport. They don't get frightened when when they see us, and we actually have some folks that ask for officers by name. Of course, we run 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so we can't always produce that same officer, but hopefully we can produce the positive result. We also have reality-based training team. Those are safe scenarios that are pretty lifelike. We don't obviously use any ammunition or anything like that, but it helps put the officers in situations where we can watch them react and hopefully critique and make everything better as we go along. We have 6 deputy medical examiners, which go on every single death investigation within the city, and sometimes, unfortunately, we have to loan them out to other agencies that don't have them. We have a computer forensics within the detective division, honor guard, public information officer, firearms team, of course, emergency vehicle operations. And I mentioned we had 2 canines in the patrol division. We also have a drug dog that is supervised by a sergeant, and her name is Ruka, and she is probably one of the better dogs in the state, as long as Ryan Simmons as a handler. We have we had a community response team for a little over half the year, I think. That's currently disbanded because we're low on numbers and we can't, patrol obviously needs to be covered. There are no exceptions there. So we disbanded and that team had actually quite a bit of success. I think we took over a couple pounds of methamphetamine, stolen guns, property, all kinds of stuff. It also deals with nuisance problems. You'd be surprised how many issues we get with parking, and if the traffic officer can't manage to get it, or it's a very large nuisance problem, which we have had, we'll turn those guys loose on them and hopefully get compliance without getting citations and stuff like that, but we'll issue those too. We also have a DRE this year, which is I'm really happy and really excited. There's only 167 drug recognition experts in the state of Oregon. It takes over 125 hours of training to become a DRE. You have to be very smart, so I won't be applying for that. Field training, we have FTOs, field training officers. We have 7 people and a sergeant attached to that. One of the nice things is, I suppose, we're probably gonna have to knock the rust off of them because we haven't hired anybody in 3 years. And I would say that's probably because of the morale of the department. We're able to provide a good work environment. And in a state where, I don't mean the state of Oregon, but in the state that we're at, where officers can really go almost anywhere they want to work. We've been very fortunate. We don't have signing bonuses. A lot of other agencies have them. I'm not saying we should. It's part of the competitive process. As you know, we have community outreach within the department, and those include Shop with a Cop, all of the Special Olympics events, which I didn't list every single one of them, Safety Town, Kids Fair, Citizens Police Academy. We usually do a department open house usually every other year. We offer vacation home checks, so if you go on vacation and you want your residence checked, we will do that for you as well, and we always keep notes on those. As you guys probably know, we have the suicide awareness and prevention program and vehicle that goes to with the school resource officer and goes to the schools every single day. We also have breast cancer awareness, and we have an outreach group. It's called Unidos, and it's a Hispanic outreach group that I really like to meet with. I always learn something almost every single time I come away, which is wonderful. As most of you might know, in 2019, the cities of Newberg and Dundee were listed as the safest cities in Oregon. That is directly responsible, you can lay that at the feet of the officers and dispatchers that work here. They do a great job. They stay really busy. They make, we make mistakes, of course, but they make really good decisions. They kind of make their car and the neighborhoods their office instead of, hanging out in the office and BSing or, not being productive. And those are based, those rankings are based on crime statistics through the FBI, as well as how many officers you have with regards to your population. So I won't necessarily say the more officers you have, the safer you are, because it just depends on what your city is, your dynamics of your city. But you certainly can go down by not having enough officers to work. One, crime will probably go up, and then also it counts against you for not having a fully staffed department. We've been accredited since the Newberg Police Department has been accredited since 2004. Basically, that means that our policies and practices are audited every 3 years, and we follow state and national standards. I know that someone mentioned that traffic revenue was down. That's probably a direct. I'll take the blame for that mostly. During COVID, I decided that we would not be as aggressive on traffic enforcement, and we would be doing a lot more warnings. I didn't want to put people under more stress with the possibility of not having a job and those factors, and then also creating more problems, in their home lives and things like that. So I directed the officers to raise their threshold and not write so many citations. I think it was Beth last year that asked for a friend what the threshold was. That I haven't forgotten that. So that's where the traffic revenue has gone down. Yeah, 7. That's where the traffic revenue. That is why the traffic revenue has gone down. Also, you may or may not know the state of Oregon put a moratorium on the smaller, say, traffic violations, like tags and vehicle tags and things like that, which we had no problem with. Again, we didn't want to put anybody in more duress. I can tell you, I know that our threshold for speeding went up, except for in Beth's neighborhood. So significant changes this year. I think I mentioned that we were going to replace our RMS, records management system, and computer-aided dispatch center. We did that, or sorry, dispatch software, not the center. And these systems are critical to the ongoing function of the police department 911 center. They truly were out of date and put together with baling wire and Band-Aids, which those were discounted as well. And because of that, we were also able to, the system that we went to, we were able to go to almost virtually, I guess almost and virtually would be the same thing, paperless, which should also help with one of the city council's goals as far as sustainability, promote sustainability. I was also able to secure 2 satellite offices. I know that Newberg is not, this huge metropolis yet, but Doug's going to get us there. We have one in Dundee that is the fire station, and it's a very light footprint. Basically, all the officers are issued cell phones already. We have MDTs and docks. For those who don't know, those are the car computers. And we are able to actually do all of our reports, emails, and any type of template. And we're coming up actually with new template electronic ones, so we can actually take those in the field with us. And the other one is at Fred Meyer. I was able to talk to a business owner. I won't give you the name because he gives us free space, and I don't want anybody to take it from us. So, Fred Meyer, we were dealing with a ton of thefts and, thefts and drug crimes and all kinds of stuff. So I got the idea when we did Shop with a Cop that maybe if we could get a police car in that area, we would deter some of the thefts, because I think that a thief would probably go to the next town and say, I don't want to take the chance here. So on the nights and days that we have police car there, thefts go down. When we don't have them, we get calls for more shoplifting and those types of things. So we're trying to, That's probably one of our bigger retail areas. I think just about, I mean, a ton of people shop at Fred Meyer, obviously, as you know. So, you know, we're trying to, I don't want to leave a car there unattended. I don't want it to get vandalized or stolen. That would be pretty embarrassing if we had to report a stolen police car, I think. One of the other things that Rob kind of touched on, we had the city council in Dundee approved our police services contract, so that'll be a $508,000 increase or revenue to the general fund. New programs. So, and I'm looking at the screen. I haven't seen anybody fall asleep or start playing Scrabble. So I just want to make sure that I'm not boring you too much. So, you know, with all the events that have happened this last year since I've been the interim, you know, one of the big issues is de-escalation, and we do a tremendous amount of de-escalation basically in our reality-based training. However, we don't have any specific officers that fine-tune that skill. It's something that you use every single day, but we don't have trainers that will fine-tune and actually bring material in. So I was able to find some training by Force Science, and that is exactly what it sounds like. They use Force and Science to put on training. They're very, very good and very well respected trainers. So my hope is I have 3 officers registered to be trainers in de-escalation tactics. And that's a good thing. When I say tactics, that's not a bad thing. That's planning for how we can de-escalate things. My goal is to have 5 or 6. It's about $500. That's all in the budget. I'm not asking for any more money for that, but I think it's very important that we listen to the public and listen to what's going on. And we do our best to again listen and pick up some of that formal training. Solomon, did you raise your hand? You're muted.
I was just curious why we wouldn't try to get all the officers trained on that de-escalation. If there's a reason, it seems like $500 a person would be worth the potential benefits.
Solomon, I apologize. That was my fault. So the 5 or 6 officers will be official trainers, and they will train the rest of the department. I apologize for not mentioning that. So that's the goal. You know, with a 24-hour schedule, 7 days a week, you kind of need some people on different shifts. And you're right. If we spend the $500 per person, we might be able to eliminate some overtime downstream or do smaller groups, which is what we've been doing with our training. So yes, you're exactly right. The idea is to have 5 or 6 actual certified trainers to train the rest of the department. Thank you for asking that question. I hope I didn't confuse anybody else. But if Solomon asked the question, I probably messed it up. So another addition is for this year is peer support. We're teaming up with Responder Life. I was able to secure a grant through DPSST to pay for over half of it. It's basically going to make a more robust, provide more robust training and resources. The peer support team members will receive training to recognize when someone may require additional and professional help on a professional level. Peer support will be used also at major events, and many law enforcement agencies are seeing the benefits of the program, and I certainly absolutely see the benefit of the program. You know, let's just be honest, policing is a different job. It's kind of a different animal. There's a lot of trust issues, and you know, officers will trust their peers probably a little bit more. And I want to also empower those peers who go through the training, if they see something, to say something, and to make sure that we get that notification. I won't necessarily have it. They can keep it between themselves. And I certainly, if they go see somebody, I certainly don't want the results. I just want to hopefully make sure that they're better. In my opinion, not having a peer support, well, things evolve. Not having a peer support is like running your car for 25 years without changing the oil or checking the tires. You wouldn't do that. And we need to make sure that we try to provide all the tools that we can. So when someone during service, they're at their best. And when they leave, they're at their best. Dan mentioned that we also are looking at body worn cameras. I think this is our 6th budget cycle of trying to get body worn cameras. I think we're a little further ahead this year. I think we're the original amount maybe around 80,000. We're going to try to get all that paid for with a grant. I have written the policies. Well, the first rendition, I would imagine there's going to be some changes for sure. So then I'll move along. I wish I would have checked the time. I didn't look, so I don't know where I'm at on time.
Yeah, Jeff, quick question about that.
Yes.
If the grant doesn't come through, is there a plan B or C, or is it one of those things where like, well, we'll try again on the 7th budget cycle? Also, allergies are killing me right now. So that's why I probably sound funny. And I'm like sneezing over here.
Yeah, we'll have to try to find some money somewhere. I'll work with Dan. I can tell you this. If I were to poll, I would guess that we're in the high 90% of the officers that want the body worn cameras. There were some hiccups not last year, but the prior budget that didn't allow it to happen. But I can tell you, we definitely want them. I'll work with Dan and see what we can come up with. I'm sorry, that's kind of a non-committal answer, but what I can commit to is the members of the department want them, and we're going to try to find every way we can to fund it. If we get the grant, the funding is in the next 4 budget cycles. So we have to make sure that we set money aside or that we allocate money for that.
Right. No, that makes sense to me. And obviously seeking out grants and other ways to pay for things, all for it, especially when we have a structural deficit of a little over 800. But I think like Elise said, I again respect your like hope to work with Dan, but I also feel like as a budget committee, this is part of our job and work too, is to be able to find funds for things that we value. So if I'm hearing 90% of the police department is on board with it, and we also feel as though communities are on board with it, then I think it's incumbent on us to do that work and not necessarily rely on a plan B with you and Dan trying to piece together, if that makes sense.
I do.
And, just to chime in a little bit on that, we're not necessarily trying to play a game with the funding. I think we're able to find money for the program, but it's also one of the things where we're, in order to put our best foot forward on a grant, which we feel pretty confident on, made the strategic decision not to fund it in the budget. So it's not, looking as though, well, why are we funding you for that grant? And so I think we can reasonably come up with a plan B, but not necessarily unless the committee would rather us fund it from existing funds, not necessarily be as competitive in the grant, not necessarily looking to fund it in the budget in that manner, not diminishing the commitment to the program.
Sorry, one last follow-up. I know Lisa and Greg have their hands up. My initial thought is, Jeff, you'd said something about 4 budget cycles. I'll say personally, that feels long to imagine going another 4 years, especially if there's, an express need. But all right, I'll pause. I see all the hands. Sorry for taking all the space. Go ahead.
That was a 5-year commitment on the grant. And so we would keep them, sustain them for 5 years once receiving them, in essence. So like get the grant for year 1 and then commit to 4 more years of funding.
Okay, Elise, have your hand up?
I support what you're saying about the grant process. That makes total sense. We could always come back with a supplemental budget, correct? If the grant wasn't approved.
Yes.
It's hard to see the hands up. Okay, Greg, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I guess I'd probably be the odd duck out by saying I don't think we should go for the grant. I know that sounds a little crazy, but this is it's an ongoing expense. It's not a one-time expense. And I can see that the grant is intended to incentivize organizations to start the camera. And it's pretty clear that this city council doesn't need incentivization there on that. So so there's that point. I would say that I think budget should be prioritized, and if that can come in later and that's a done deal and that's okay, then great. But I wouldn't want to see another year go by just like everybody else on that. And then one more point on that, I was just wondering if I know that there are programs. I heard that there was, a $70,000 to $80,000 cost on the cameras themselves, and maybe an additional $70,000 to $80,000 to sort of run the program every year. I do know that there are services, Motorola, for instance, that provide cities with leasing options, someplace in the neighborhood of $50 to $100 a month per officer or something like that. And that would include support, that would include service, that would include periodic updates on the equipment itself. As you know, it's an electronic piece of gear, so that means it's going to become obsolete every 18 months. And I was just wondering, had you looked at some of these other strategies other than buying and running the whole program ourselves?
So before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we are looking at options right now and trying to fund it. And the process based on the cost of the acquisition would need to have a request for proposal or some purchasing process. And so, just those kinds of things come into factor, so I think that the bells and whistles and some of the funding options should be part of that consideration, and appreciate that as an option, I guess, that think about those kinds of things. And we're not, I don't think we're looking at this as sort of I think we're looking at this knowing that we want to get into and have the technology, and we want to also make sure that it is sustained, and that it's not, we're trying to get out of the just in time and sort of the catastrophic need to remedy some of our IT issues or, some of our other programmatic issues. And so, I think that we'll look at that life cycle, and we'll look at, kind of the acquisition costs as well as the carrying costs. So, appreciate that. That's definitely something to call out, and it's helpful feedback for us.
And Greg, I won't go too far down the field, but I'm not sure how much you know about body worn cameras. Maybe it's a lot, but usually where a large portion of the cost is storage of the digital media. So that's that. And I would not necessarily want it stored here for transparency reasons. If Axon has a gigantic failure or something goes through, a virus goes through their computers, gets their firewall and eats all this stuff, that's not on the Newberg Dundee Police Department. That's a national thing with, as an example, if you used Axon, then that would be a national issue and not a Newberg Dundee Police Department issue where people doubt your credibility because you got a big case coming up and all of a sudden, sure, you just lost the data. I don't want us to be in that business, if that makes sense.
So I want to interject here that maybe having a session and Dan, you or Rob, you kind of think there's a lot of interest as you guys are going into designing and working on this. This might be a nice topic for an in-depth discussion, which is not necessarily a budget discussion. So I want to, Greg's raised lease versus buy, and everybody's telling you it's really important. And great to get grant money, but if we don't, then sounds like people are very interested in figuring out what else you would trade off to be able to do it.
Yep.
I'm doing this summary because we're now past his time for his next topic as well. So just if Solomon, you had your hand up one last time, and then we'll move on.
And not to be answered right now, I just thought maybe going forward on this topic, if we could find out when that grant would be going through. If it doesn't, what kind of process it would take for us to do that, and then how long is the implementation period from either getting the funding to actually getting to the point where they're on and being used so that we can make maybe a more nuanced decision in this process when the time comes.
Super.
That's good. So the other thing to wrap this up maybe is one of the programmatic things that Jeff and I have spoken about is, oversight and having, a citizen oversight committee, and that is not a budget decision per se, but a programmatic one. But that seems like a ripe, this topic seems like a ripe opportunity for feedback from residents and, implementation assistance from the community and that dialogue. It's something in the renewal of the Dundee police contract. We had something in there that was similar, and we kept it in order to include those residents as well that are in the service territory. So, that may be, Molly, as you think about, kind of getting feedback, that may be a vehicle for moving some of these things forward. That assumes that it's within the budget, right? And then, we're moving it forward. So I don't know if it's a decision that we would want to talk more about in the committee, or if we want to, in deliberations or those kinds of things, or if we want to kind of move forward on it elsewhere. So not to derail deliberations on it in this committee.
I think what I want to do is hold it as an item to give both you and Jeff time to go back and think about what alternatives. I think Bryce said, what's your plan B or C?
Yep.
And if the committee understands you have alternatives and that we can address it with a supplemental budget, then that allows people confidence that it will indeed happen, which I think is the intent of most folks here. Does that sound pretty good to the budget committee? Heads nodding. Okay, cool, awesome. And now I will have won my bet with Dan, which may involve free coffee, that we would certainly not be able to get through the police, which is always the most interesting one, in 10 minutes. So
we've got one more question.
Oh, darn. Okay. Rick.
Yeah, sorry, just a couple of points on this. The body cameras, not to belabor the point, but we're talking about less than 0.5% to 1% of the general fund. So the only other point is that I think if, as we go through, I hope somebody's keeping a list of items that the committee is particularly interested in, to make sure that they are brought back in. The only other thing, Chief, I won't let you off the hook. At some point, and this is not just for the police department, but I think it's for everybody generally, you talked about the level of sworn officers that we've got. So 33 in a community of 24,000. I know you said already, yeah, but nonetheless, it's so what I guess the question is, for a semi-rural community of our size, is there a benchmark that says that's a good number? Now, I'm not picking on police. It's just because you all, as we know, are getting more scrutiny than anyone else. But it's also an overall question for the size of staffing that we've got in this budget at whatever 138 FTEs. How does that, is that a reasonable number based on our community and our demographics, I guess is the question. And I'm don't need an answer now. It's just a broad question. So thank you.
Okay.
Right. So Jeff, you want to cover communications?
I will. I will skip investigation support services. I'll just a couple of things about them. They do all of our crime reporting stats to the state of Oregon and federal government, the distribution of records. It's really kind of, I've never, well, this is only my second time, but last year I didn't even mention them. And I think they're kind of like well, boy, I was going to say grease the skids, but that doesn't really sound very glamorous. No one thinks of records and evidence. And if you have some problems, records and evidence, you'll have a big problem with your department. So those folks do a great job for us. So that's enough said. They do a lot more, but I just wanted to give them a shout out because they do a really good job for us. Okay, communications. Communications team is the answering point for all emergency 911 calls for the east end of Yamhill County, as well as the switchboard for Newberg Dundee Police business lines after our emergency calls, Newberg Dundee Public Works. Additionally, the unit performs some record functions and supports the police operations. 911, just a couple of facts, 911 dispatchers received almost 56,000 calls last year. with over 9,500 of them being 911 calls. Those 911 calls, with regards to the 911 calls, 98% of them were answered within 10 seconds. 10 seconds is the lowest amount. So they could be 1 second, it could be 3, it could be 10. The dispatch center is staffed with 10 full-time dispatchers, and also half of the support services manager comes out of this fund as well. That's Mary Newell. The cost of which is allocated between 3 funding sources: the general fund, public safety fee, and 911 revenue. Significant changes is we are moving to, and I'm almost done, we are moving to the digital 800 megahertz system. That is a federal mandate. Being on the WACA backbone, that helps us. We secured funding for that, which I'll cover later, or Rob will, depending. I don't know if I get him a coffee, he'll do it. We're adding also a CAD to CAD system, which will, the best way to explain this is our computers will be linked virtually. When a medical call comes in, our dispatchers will start typing the information and it'll show up over at WACA, because TVFNR is dispatched by WACA. So we will, in a sense, be a call taker for them, which will actually speed things up for medical and fire in our districts. And that is it, unless you have questions.
Stephanie.
Yes, and I'm sorry about this because this goes back to the general police fund. Can you tell me a little more about those capital outlay lines and the increase in both of those, what those are?
Let me pull that up. Can you tell me what lines you're looking at or what the account numbers are?
Yes, so on page 39, it's the very bottom capital outlay.
I think I know which ones you're talking about.
Yeah, that one, and then there's one on page 40.
Okay.
So Jeff, you want me to take the page 39? So Stephanie, that's a great catch. This was one of those clerical errors that Dan referred to with respect to the body worn cameras. There was a misunderstanding between his office and my office, and so that 135,000 includes the 85,000 for the body worn cameras. But you know, the intention was to not have it included there and have a conversation with this group. So that number should be 50,000, which relates to the purchase of a patrol car.
So you're saying, Rob, you've already solved the problem and the cameras are in there. It's awesome. Oh, no.
Well,
Okay.
I'm not sure I'd characterize it that way,
No,
Molly, but
no. Okay.
I'm thinking I might get a thumping tomorrow.
Yeah. Stephanie, you had a question on page 40 as well?
Yep, same question as the capital outlay on that. Is that included in the
So you're talking about
same
2130?
deal?
Is that about?
Yes,
Is that right?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you look up at the vehicle equipment, so basically 2 lines above. So 59001, and then the next one below it, which is 04. Those are zeroed out or combined into that account. Does that make sense? And that's part of what Rob was talking about when he said we, as an organization, weren't using those funds correctly from an accounting standpoint. Does that help? Rob, can I be part of the accounting team?
Well, no, but well done.
Okay.
I take my coffee black, Jeff.
Too late, I answered it.
Lozelle, you have your hand up?
Yeah, my question was just answered. That was my question about the internal charges. So.
Excellent. And Mike.
So I was looking at the overtime on page 39 and 40. Why, if you have different officers coming in at different shifts, why do we continually have overtime going on? Or do we not have enough officers to cover the shifts? So officers are working longer, or what's the reason?
So we have contractual obligations. Of course, the officers have to go to court. If we have an officer that's sick, we have to fill that shift. We can't just go with 2 officers. There's also I can tell you a department, as an example, a department is in like McMinnville, their overtime is over $500,000. Ours is 144 because of the way we schedule. Our officers are pretty flexible. We don't cheat them out of a contract or anything like that. We do have to live by the contract. If you have to come in on your day off, the officers get a 3-hour call back, whether they're for 20 minutes or 3 hours. And that's a contractual issue. Did I answer your question, or do you?
Yes. No,
Okay.
that's fine.
So really 144 is pretty lean for this size of an organization.
Beth,
How common is it for a city of our size to have its own 911 center?
I would say it's not common. It is, I think it's around $1.2 million. If you were to contract with someone else, which I don't think you're going to get the same service. I can tell you our 911 dispatchers do a lot of data mining for the officers on calls to have more information during arrests and that type of stuff. They are going to be taking 911 calls for medical and fire, which will help response times. But it is not. I think there's 3 other ones in the state, but that's a guess. I'd have to look that up.
So it's extremely rare for a city our size to have its own 911.
I don't know if I'd say extremely rare, but it's rare. And the reason a long time ago, my understanding, I wasn't even here when this happened, but what I've gleaned or been told that through that process is we were with another dispatch center and didn't feel like the service was at the level that the residents of Newberg and Dundee wanted it, or Newberg for sure.
How do you know that the service level is going down based on who's answering the calls? Is it the time to get there?
No, it's hard to say without sort of bashing another. I can tell you this. If we need to make a change in our dispatch procedures or what we want to do or what the citizens want, I walk right over and I make the change. If we go with someone else, I'm part of a board and we're just all together and we sort of agree or disagree either way. They don't necessarily, they kind of answer to me, but they really don't answer to me. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that we get a better level service having our own dispatch center. But I understand your question.
Because I mean, if we're 2 officers short and we can't get the body cams and just kind of, prioritizing what's going to make us safer, keep us safer. Because I mean, you guys do a great job, so thank you.
Sure. So part of the other thing is we do have, with having the dispatch center, part of my plan is when we do get body cameras, we're going to shift some responsibilities around so that we don't add additional personnel. And most agencies, during my research, most agencies, like I went to Beaverton and checked out what they had. I want to say they have 18 or 19 records people. Obviously, it's a much larger agency, so you can scale it out. And they actually needed to add 2 more records people just to handle the body cams. I think we can do that with no additional cost in personnel. The other thing is you won't save just that, the money for dispatch. You're going to have to pay someone else to dispatch for you. So by the time you hire more people, say for body cams and records and the things that they do for us, because they don't just answer 911 calls, they also do records tasks for us as well.
So we
it's
don't
not a
really know
one-for-one,
how,
I guess.
there's no way for us to know how much we would save if we were contracting with someone else.
Well, I can tell you, there's been umpteen million studies, Denise. I don't know how many you've seen. And the problem was with the waffling back and forth, then you start losing employees because they don't know they have a job. So they're leaving and they're going somewhere else. And the cost savings, I don't know what that was, but I know the previous chief said that you're going to save maybe $300,000 by the time you staff what you need to staff and the things that they already do. Does that make sense? I
Yeah.
want to say, Denise, do you remember, was it 300?
Yeah, it was about that. And then you also, how long are you locked into that contract? And, 5 years from now, what will that contract look like? So this just seemed more stable
You
for our
definitely
community.
lose control of your payment because you don't own it. Does that make sense?
Okay, I'm gonna call time on that and note it as a topic that we may, Jeff, ask you to think about, because there are 3 more hands up still here, if that's okay, Beth. Did you get your question out? Okay, good. I don't know whose was first, so I apologize. Elise?
I was just gonna say kind of what they said, just I would be interested in what the rate of the contract would be. And I'd imagine it's somewhat similar to what we're paying for our own 911 center. And I think it's great that you're already thinking, Chief Kosmicki, about how to enhance responsibilities and growth opportunities for the 911 dispatch to take on that records keeping. I think that's a great strategy.
I'm pretty certain I can get it done.
Okay, Greg?
It was a little bit difficult for me to figure out what the cost was of that. It seems like a dispatch was sort of sprinkled in maybe 3 different spots. What is the total cost for 911 and dispatch?
So the total cost is, I believe it's $1.2 million. But there's also, so that covers 10 dispatchers. We have 2 that are paid out of 911 funds, and then 2 that are paid out of a separate fund. So those don't come out of the general fund. So basically, really, you're paying for 6 dispatchers. Does that make sense? And those other funds, unfortunately, I'm going to talk to you later about those. So that might, they're later in the budget. They're Fund 13 and Fund 16 for that.
Okay, but that bottom line number for that, for police communications, that 1.2, that's everything.
911.
Okay, great.
But you also have to subtract Fund 13 and Fund 16 because those don't come out of the general fund. Those are separate. Does that make sense?
We'll get the full picture when we finish those other 2 funds, but he's asking about expenses right now, not revenue. So is the total cost, the total revenue you spend for 911, does he need to take the 1.2 and then add 2 other numbers to it, Jeff?
No, I would subtract those 2 other numbers.
Okay.
Thank
you.
Sorry.
You actually would add, because those
to
two,
have
the 2 dispatchers are funded from Fund 16, I believe it is. And those are
Right.
additional on top of. And then, just to really be transparent in terms of at least the last year's, there were some capital outlays as well. So, those are, one-time things that are elsewhere in the budget, but that's not the ongoing carrying costs of the department in a normal year. Those were the CAT RMS and those kinds of improvements. And I believe there might be some debt service in there too, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
Okay. And then Bryce, you had your question?
Yeah, one, this isn't actually necessarily for you, Jeff, but I'm noticing maybe Dan or we'll get you in here early. This is maybe a newbie question, but the internal charge admin support for each of the areas seems to be pretty significant. Can somebody just give just a quick rundown of what that is?
Yeah. Rob?
Yeah, I can do that. Basically, what we take is Fund 31, which is our Administrative Services Support Fund. And that includes city manager, HR, city manager, HR, not economic development anymore, but outreach, community outreach, finance, IT. So all of those, and those then are cost allocated out to the various operating departments on a number of different bases that make sense. Like HR, I believe, is allocated based on number of FTE. IT is allocated based on the number of pieces of equipment in each operating department.
I see.
But those numbers that you're seeing there in terms of administrative services, internal charges are the results of those calculations.
All right, that makes sense. That's why you won't necessarily see it in the general government, general
Right.
fund line.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Second question to Jeff. You mentioned that there's a team for mental health, the mental health resource team. How many officers are on that team?
So we're in, oh, sorry. So we're in the middle of going through that right now. We're vetting it out. Responder Life helps us do that. So they come in and they do an internal survey, then they do interviews, and then, you know, I have some say in the approval. Obviously, if someone slipped through that really wouldn't be a good person on the peer support team,
Sure.
then veto that. But so it's kind of nice to have someone else come in, and then it's also they ask questions like, who of the peers that you think should be on the peer support team? So they take all that information and put it all together, and that's part of the fee that we pay.
I see. Okay, so this is like an internal team meant to help provide resources for mental health for officers. This isn't necessarily an outward facing team that's addressing.
No, this is all inward.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Bryce, your hand's still up, but I'm assuming that's because you are having allergies. Yes, okay. All right, so to the, there are a couple of things that came out of there that I just want to make sure we note for future discussion. Dan, the plan B for making sure the body cameras happen, the 911 cost trade-off are two that came up. as key ones.
We've got staff taking notes, so
Excellent, okay.
hopefully they've captured that. I've got my own notes, so those are my notes as well.
I figure we all do, but just in case, I'm using the whole committee to catch us if we miss something important. So.
And we're recording it, so yeah, we'll get it all.
One thing I've noticed about recorded meetings, the amount of times they're actually listened to is quite small. Amazing. Okay, if that's, thank you, Jeff, for your perseverance there. Nice job.
Staffing
Thank you.
levels were also brought up as well.
Mr. Worthy, you are worthy of a time slot.
Cheers.
Never heard that before. Yeah.
It was always not, I'm not worthy in school, but hey, I got past that. So COVID was a really tough year for everybody in all places of employment. And in the library, one of the things that we had to grapple with was many of our staff chose the COVID year as the year to retire, and who can blame them? As a result of that, we had a lot of staff leave us. And of course, despite doing some new hiring, the threat was the loss of skills, of institutional knowledge. And we had to respond to that by developing core competency skills that would encapsulate what people did on each of the different desks and inside each of the different processes. So that's how we intended to mitigate that risk. You may have noticed that the supplies and equipment line item is projected to come in at a far higher level than was budgeted. This is actually the result of CARES funded equipment purchases, including laptops and some RFID equipment. In other words, this overage does not affect the city in terms of the bottom line. In many line items, you'll see that there has been a slight upwards adjustment to take account of the rising cost of materials and supplies. Overall, this budget projection is very conservative, especially given the financial challenges that are facing the city and the desire to close the long-running systemic deficit that we've seen discussed for many years. I am hoping that when better times return to the city, that we can see some expansion for library services, particularly in the Latinx area, where we would have to consider possibly a very competitive recruitment process again. But I know this is not the year for that. The other thing that will jump out at you as you look at the spreadsheet, of course, is the amount of money that we have to pay to be inside the CCRLS network. This is an unfortunate element of doing business, since we are in that Shemekada network, and the cost escalation, which this year was over 8%, it's a considerable escalation, was based upon the property taxes that would have been collected by CCRLS if we were in the Shemekada system area rather than in the Portland Community College service area. So that's a piece of historical legacy that we have to grapple with every year. And at that point, I'd like to invite any questions that there may be.
Right. Oh, I see hands up. Sorry. Yes, good. Beth?
Did I see somewhere the number of FTE for the libraries going down?
Yes, as I alluded to, there were many retirements during the period of COVID, and our overall staffing has gone down quite a bit.
Okay, and
So-
we're good with that number of FTEs for service levels?
I believe that we can get back to over 42 hours open per week with the staffing level that we still have. Perhaps we can get to 44 hours per week. We certainly can't get to more than 44 hours per week, but that would be better than what we used to have. This is because we've deployed some new RFID technology, radio frequency pads. We are using the staff a little bit better. We're also going to come back with a schedule that's a little bit stronger. It's going to have core hours from 10 o'clock till 6 o'clock. And so the schedules are going to overlap in the middle in a more efficient way than the schedule that I inherited when I first arrived here in 2019. Of course, if I had more staff, I could do more, but I think we can get back to the old service level.
Stephanie? Nope. Okay, Greg?
I was just wondering if you could give us an update on the situation with the leaking windows and the foundation water coming in. And I know you've got an investigation underway, but I don't see anything in the budget that might be able to respond to what the investigation reveals.
That's a great question. And actually the architects, I believe I can now say this, one company has been chosen. It's DECA is the name of the firm. And DECA is retaining an outside water envelope specialist subcontractor to look into the problem of our leaking and corroding window panes. The architects have not come on site yet for the first site inspection. So we don't actually know what the final cost of remediation will be. The budget that the initial budget that is being paid for the investigation is about $25,000. And that's coming from pre-existing building repair funds. So what the final dollar amount will be, we don't know yet. But when we do know, of course, I'm hoping that the city will be able to play a part in effecting those repairs once we know the numbers.
Will, is that a library cost or a public works or public facilities cost?
It's a public facilities cost.
Right.
But it's not a new line item. Actually, the investigation part came out of money that was earmarked for carpet replacement and or HVAC replacement. So that's why you don't see a new line item in the budget. Now, once we know the real number, it's going to be a bigger number, and then we're going to have to figure out how to solve that problem.
Lozelle?
Well, just a follow-up question there.
Sorry, Greg.
Yeah, no problem. If there's nothing in the budget, then are you anticipating then next budget cycle to actually deal with the problem that's revealed maybe in the next month or two?
Actually, the timeline that they're giving us is 2 to 3 months. I'm hoping it could even be in a supplemental budget somewhere down the line. So of course I have to have a hard number before I could bring it before this body.
Okay, thank you.
Lozelle?
Well, my question is, if there are emergency repairs, where does the money come from to fix these emergency repairs that you can't wait to get fixed?
We have a fund in the public works budget for those kinds of things.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's where the money that he just referenced in terms of the study is coming from.
Okay.
Well, some of it.
Yeah, so Greg, you won't see that in Will's line items, but it's a good question to ask Russ when we get to public work.
Thank you. And Russ has been very supportive in, you know, some public works directors would have said, nope, this is for carpet and it's for carpet. But he was willing to be flexible in looking at that problem. And I'm sure as soon as we know what the final number is, we can bring it back and have a discussion about solving the problem.
Okay, Bryce?
You'd mentioned earlier, if you had more, you could do more with more staff. Approximately, like what would be a salary to add one FTE? And what would they do?
Well, if I were to add one FTE position, it would be an expensive one because I would go for a senior librarian, have a sufficient salary level to get a Latinx librarian, which I would have to poach from Washington County or Clackamas County.
Sure. What would that salary, that a competitive high-level senior librarian salary look like?
With build up, probably perhaps about $80,000 to $85,000.
Okay.
But I will say, obviously, that would be that would not be in line with closing the deficit that the city faces and putting us on that footing.
Sure.
Okay, Stephanie?
Yeah, mine is more of a statement and a rhetorical question, and it follows kind of what Bryce was saying. So when I'm looking at this, and I know this is going to sound like a comparison between the police department and the library, and it's really not meant to be, but the library, we're looking at reducing their budget by $172,000, and we're increasing the police budget by about $409,000. What I'm seeing, I don't take any issue with that increase in the police budget, but I sort of look at these numbers and wonder if this reflects the needs and the wants of our community at large. And when I hear Will say an FTE that would bring in a Spanish-speaking librarian is less than that $172,000 of a cut that they're taking this year, I feel like our community would benefit from allowing that. And I just want to make sure that we're really in this budget reflecting the needs of our community. And when I see the difference in those budgets, I think that maybe we could work more closely with our community to get those to where they need to be.
Okay, Lizelle? Maybe, Lizelle?
Doing a project. I'm so sorry.
No worries.
What was the question?
Oh, sorry, your hand is up on the screen.
Oh, no. Oh, my God.
Okay. All right, good. I began to think perhaps you just went there like this. All right. Any other questions if I've missed anyone? All right, so what I want to capture there is an interest in the $85,000 Hispanic librarian as a strong contribution that the budget could make, and not to forget when Russ comes on to ask about the dripping windows. And kudos, Will, for trying to help with the structural deficit. Anything else? Okay, then. Is it time for Mr. Rux? Perhaps.
Thank you. So Doug Rux, your Community Development Director. So this is the Planning Division budget out of the general fund. And so planning is pretty much like it says. So we do all the planning, all the long range planning, all of the current planning. We also do economic development activities. And we provide the planning services to the city of Dundee. So in part, I'm like Jeff. We provide a third-party service to our neighboring community. Most of this budget is pretty much status quo. I will highlight a few of the changes. For 21-22, the personnel service reflects a full year of our housing planner. That was only funded for a portion of this particular year. And we've also taken my admin assistant, and they had about 0.1 of their hours, and that's been moved over into the general fund and out of Fund 14, which we will talk about at another meeting. With COVID, as Dan had mentioned, it's been a challenge over the years. So we've seen a lot more electronic transactions, so people paying with their credit cards. So if you look at for what we budgeted for this fiscal year to what we're proposing for next fiscal year, it's directly attributed to more and more people paying with their debit cards and their credit cards for their permit fees for the planning side of the world. We are looking at applying for a couple of grants from the Department of Land Conservation and Development. And one of those directly plays into the housing goal of the City Council, and that's to do a housing production strategy. And then the other grant we're looking for from the state is related to our urban growth boundary expansion, and I'll get to the challenges on those. Our professional services is our big expenditure line item out of our materials and services. And in that one, the big expense is our urban growth boundary expansion. We were a little behind schedule. It took a little longer to finish up our economic opportunities analysis and our housing needs analysis and our public, semi-public land analysis. And we still have to have some conversations with council to get some policy direction on those. Originally, I was hoping we were going to do that in about February, but now we're going to be starting those conversations in May. If you look at 21-22 and our internal charges, you'll see that there's an increase there. And some of that is related to legal services. So this is where I get to the challenge portion. We've done our housing needs analysis and our economic opportunities analysis. As we go through a process to officially adopt those and put those into our comprehensive plan, there could be legal challenges. And so I have some funds budgeted for our consultants to come back and help us through that, and also for legal services to address any challenges that may come forward. On the grants, I'll circle back to that as a challenge. It depends upon state funding. So it depends on what the legislature will do. My conversations with the state is they've got their budget proposal in there. It's one of the last things that gets adopted every legislative session is budgets. And if they get those allocations, then we intend to apply for some grants. If that funding allocation does not come through the legislature, then those two grant opportunities go away. But it's revenue in or revenue out. We would not do the projects if we cannot achieve the grants. And that's what I have. So I'll save some time.
Oh, no. Now we ask for questions, lots of questions. I do have a question I'll sneak in as the chair, which is terribly rude. The bank fee cost doubled from last year to this year, from 9,000 projected to 28 or 21,000. Feels like the city needs to have a policy around how much of the bank fees the city's going to pay versus the community is paying a little more for their fees because they're paying the bank fee as well for the credit card. This looks like a slight thing on yours, but I would hate to see it on some of the other fee-based stuff. So is anyone, Dan, looking at how the city wants to address this growing cost? Bank fees, people using credit cards?
I think it goes into the bucket of financial software and some of the tools that we have. But it's something that we'll have to look at. No, and not necessarily in a holistic, thoughtful way are we necessarily prepared to address it. But we've been encouraging, obviously, we've referenced having more transactional things online with COVID and just generally for convenience. So I think we should probably have a plan for it.
Looks like it might spiral. Rick, you had your hand up?
Yeah. So Doug, is the recruitment for the housing manager occurring now?
The recruitment is closed and we are working on interview process.
Awesome. And what grade will that position come in at?
It's an associate planner level.
Okay, 163 then. Thank you.
Yep. And we usually, for budgeting purposes, we budget at the middle step
Right.
of that, and then we adjust accordingly.
Thank you.
Okay, Lizelle?
So I have a question about the legal expenses. So do you get an outside legal counsel even though we have a city attorney part of Newberg?
And go ahead, Dan.
Yes, yes. I mean, the city attorney now is an outside counsel. We've hired a firm, Miller Nash, that provides that service as of about Christmas time, and so that is a transition change. So we have out of house counsel, we have outside counsel, and are now transitioned there. But I think Doug's also going to tell you that we have often used special counsel for more technical matters as well. The hope is that Miller Nash being a firm rather than us having one individual with, of course, limited expertise in all manner of kinds of things, that we would not maybe use, the outside counsel aside from Miller Nash in the ongoing processes. So they've got special counsel in that firm who can handle some of the planning issues.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Good. Doug, thank you for having the parking study money in your budget. I am very appreciative. Okay, on to the next exciting topic, because I saw Stephanie yawn. Not that I yawned, but non-D.
Yeah, so this is non-departmental, meaning it doesn't fit within any of the other areas of the general fund that we've already spoken of. And really all it is any debt service specific to the general fund, also interfund transfers, and then contingencies. So let me just really quickly kind of put a bow on the general fund for you with this section. And we don't have any outstanding debt relative to the general fund currently, so there's no debt service. Those lines are only shown there because we have to show those historical years for budget purposes. The transfers out, we're making our last transfer from the general fund to the water fund to help pay off the software in the current year, 2021. So there's no further need for that transfer in 21-22. The $372,000 is debt service related to, I don't remember, I believe it's the communications, the tower. I think it has
Megahertz upgrade.
Yes, thank you. Dang it. I knew I was going to trip over something tonight. That was it. The $42,000 transfer to economic development is to plug the hole between what is raised through the business license fee and the cost of running that program with one full FTE over there. And then finally, in contingency, we simply, this is what balances the fund, if you will. So it's what's left over. It's not quite that straightforward, though. In prior year, there was a $1.1 million unappropriated ending balance. So that was set aside and not appropriated by the budget committee and the council in the prior year. I'm proposing that or the city, I shouldn't say the city is proposing that we move that up into contingency to provide the flexibility to use that money if needed. However, it still has to come back to council before it could be accessed. You cannot spend directly from contingency. It's, it's required to come to council and be transferred to another category before it can be spent. And then you'll see that $413,772, that corresponds with the transfer in from the discontinued fund 32 that we talked about in revenue. So this is kind of where it gets parked. This is where that savings account is now for the general fund portion. So that's where we're at. And luckily it all balances. The total uses and total resources actually worked. So we're pretty excited about that, us math geeks in the finance group. Is there any questions about this area? Great, thank you all.
Okay, all right, it's, I believe we have 8 minutes until end of session, Dan. Do you want to start the service fund and then pick up again in our next meeting? Or do we have any closing? I just don't know if we need time for any closure before we adjourn the meeting. So help me here on what you want to do.
So,
I'm fine to set it up and continue for the 8 minutes or 7.5 minutes, whatever we have, and if the committee is.
Oh yeah, it's just fine. Sometimes there's work to do when you close the meeting. And since I'm new to being the chair, I just want to know if there's, okay.
Well,
yes,
and Molly, I just wanted to, you said before we adjourn the meeting, we don't actually adjourn this meeting, we recess it. So that it's continued next week, because otherwise we got to go through a whole bunch of other publications and stuff. So
oh no, we'll definitely.
It's semantics, but
no, it's good. It's good. So you'll be happy to know that recess is not canceled in this school.
I love
recess, we've done it,
man. Recess.
Okay.
I mean, the other thing we can do is if there is public comment, you know,
I wondered,
check in on that.
Sue, do we have any public comment? Anyone?
No, there is no public comment. No one signed up. No one sent in anything for this meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Then Dan, if you want to kick off, we'll let you go for 7 more minutes and then recess.
Yeah, so Fund 31, you know, I don't know, Rob, if you want to talk revenues and that sort of thing first.
Yeah, I can give just a quick overview of Fund 31. As you scroll through the first few pages there, 51, 52, 53, 54, those give some description of the various programs that are covered in our internal services and our administrative support services. The revenues, or I guess they're not really revenues, the resources into this fund are the inter-fund administrative charges. And again, I mentioned earlier that these are based on a number of allocation bases depending on the costs being distributed. So again, HR is distributed based on FTE. Finance is distributed based on a couple of different calculations. Utility billing is split between water, sewer, and storm, for example. So all of those other operating programs are charged for their share of what finance, HR, IT, general, city manager, the services that are performed for them. You can see that the amount has gone up, if you will, in terms of the resources. But again, at the bottom there, a significant chunk of that increase in resources is the transfer in from the equipment replacement fund. So this is Fund 31's share of that savings account that was over in Fund 32 that's been dropped in here now. And when we get to the bottom of Fund 31, you'll see contingencies designated or assigned to each of those portions of this fund for them to spend in the future, capital outlay things that they've set aside or other types of charges that were set aside. Okay. That's really kind of in a nutshell, you know, the summary of the resource side. I don't know if there are any questions about that, or if you want to just keep trudging ahead and have Dan talk a little bit about his program within this fund. I'll leave that to y'all.
Yeah, I don't see any hands raised. So Dan, do you want to go ahead and,
We've got one.
oh, we do have one. Rick.
My apologies. So Rob, I'm just trying to go through the methodology. So on page 55, we've got a number for internal review for legal, say, and it's at 618,120 is
Yes,
I
sir.
think the total shown there, right?
Yes, sir.
But then when I look to the city attorney page, why am I not seeing the same number?
Well, because it's not that straightforward in terms of the ability. There's more to it than just the straight city attorney piece. It factors in. You know what? I'm not going to shoot from the hip on this
Hey,
one.
Rob, is an
Let me-
example the legal fees from planning, for example,
Yeah,
which are
that's the follow-up.
specialty.
You know what? I'm not completely
Okay.
sure. So what I'd rather do than give you something that's 80% right and maybe 20% made up. I'd rather come back to you with the right answer at the next meeting if I can, Rick.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great though, because
that
one
fair?
of the recurring questions has been, how much do we actually spend on legal?
Okay.
And so that would be good to know. So I greatly appreciate it.
All right. Thank you for your patience with that.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Okay, in 2 minutes, the city manager's office is me. The last year we reduced that budget to about 300,000 overall, and I came in under budget. So yay me, I guess. But have reinstated the professional services amount that had been under budgeted or under what was budgeted back to the 30,000. And my hope there is professional development of the team of department heads. It's something we had started down the path on in terms of DISC training and some of the workplace style and things like that. And so really looking at trying to blend the team, given that we've had some turnover in department heads over the last year, and we'll continue to have obviously some reorganization issues and things of that nature. So imagining some need for professional support. That's pretty much it. I don't know. I think I saw a question come in on the chat, but I don't know if there are questions.
And
Generally,
did your salary get cut 3K? The question was from Bryce in the chat. Did your salary go down, Dan?
I'm not. I'll have to check my pay stub, but no, it has not gone down. It hasn't gone up either. But I think it's noted in here that it did, but it has not gone up either.
Okay. All right, then. In the last minute, thank you all very much. These are long sessions. It's greatly appreciated. And we will recess and then meet formula-based. Okay. We will meet again and continue to plow through this. If as you're plowing through it, you want to send questions to Dan ahead of time, then that will allow them, if you see something, it'll allow them to do their homework ahead of time. There's not a lot of time between now and the next, so, but still, okay?
Yeah, that'd be helpful if you do have questions, because the time in between those two sessions is really limited for next week.
Yeah.
Molly,
yeah.
If I could take 1 minute, I
Yep.
can answer the question now for Rick about why legal doesn't tie. So the amount coming in here for legal, if you take the total amount that's applied to legal down below, when we get there, it's 775,000. This is only reimbursing for a portion of legal. Code enforcement, which is also part of the total legal costs, is recaptured here on another line. And then we also have some direct revenue into the city that reimburses for a portion of legal costs. So overall, it all gets offset, but it's done in a couple of different lines. Does that help?
Yeah, it sure does. Thank you.
Awesome.
Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Anything else, Dan or Rob, before we recess? All right. Thank you all.